podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Mike McGuire. Received his PhD in applied organizational psychology from Hofstra University and is currently a principal consultant at Mercer. Welcome, Mike. Thanks
Welcome.
for
Hey
joining us.
guys, hey Joe, hey Brandon. Long time no see. It's been a few months, but happy to get together with you guys today.
What was the last date? It was. I mean, I know it's the day
Yeah,
of PSYOP. What was that, like April
something
17th?
along those lines. I mean, I'm living in babyland right now, as I just kind of talked to you guys before. So the days are kind of blending into each other in certain ways. But yeah, I think it was April. I can at least say it was April, and it was probably that Saturday night right before we probably left on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that was. Did we meet you any other time? Maybe I'm wondering if it was at like an alumni event, but I wonder if that's the first time that we got to
I
actually
think
talk.
we met at Houndstooth the
hmm
year before, maybe one or both of
Yes.
you. But we didn't talk podcast then, right? We just go, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. Oh, this is the guy that won whatever award from Hofstra, That's how I'm typically introduced at the Hofstra meetings. But yeah, I think we met at the Houndstooth, and then we really kind of got to talking and really get to know each other at SIOP.
Yeah, and it was a blast. I remember Joe and I were reflecting on our PSYOP, and we definitely had some highlights with you guys. That was probably one of the things that we really took away from PSYOP was when we got to spend time with you guys and really just getting to know people and having conversations is what it's all about. And that's kind of what it felt like we were doing the whole time. And that's a good lesson out there for students listening to this and people early in their careers. It's like you can build really strong connections with people. And like even though we haven't seen each other since PSYOP, that's probably more due to Babyland than it is anything else.
That is correct, Brandon. That is correct. But yeah, from a developmental aspect, right? Just getting to know not only the people that are in your own program, right? The alumni, the people that are in existence in the program right now, but it's also kind of saying, hey, what's going on with your network right now? Who are these other people that you can introduce me to? And I mean, you guys were doing such a fantastic job of that, of just kind of doing the pure networking at PSYOP. I was pretty impressed with it and happy to spend some time with you. So let me give you some kudos right off the bat, saying that yes, you've
That's
obviously
all
worked on
Brandon.
your that's all Brandon.
Brandon's the social butterfly. I'm just along for the ride.
Joe
You
carries it.
I think you both have it, Joe. Don't let yourself down a little bit that way.
I
I mean,
appreciate
it
it.
was yeah, it was really great to be with you guys and talk with you because from my aspect too, I'm always interested in learning what the students are interested in as they're kind of moving through their academic careers at Hofstra too. It wasn't the same as when I finished up the program 3 years ago. It wasn't the same as when I started the program back in 2014. So just seeing the evolving interests of students kind of helps me recalibrate my mind. All right, what's really kind of important in the IO world these days? What's on top of mind for a lot of these students as they're looking to get themselves into the workforce? Because I'm not only thinking about, all right, who can I kind of get into my firm potentially, even though we're not hiring right now. Just let me throw that out there. But you know, what are these people's interests and how do they link with the IO work that's actually happening in the business world at the moment? So it's a little refreshing. I get to meet a lot of people that are kind of entrenched in positions already, but the student perspective is always really kind of great to hear at these events outside of just general networking with other people in the business.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like hearing you say that, as Joe and I both just graduated, I've already noticed, Joe. I don't know if you noticed, like how far removed we get from just like the IO research and literature so quick. Like when we were filming these podcasts, it was so easy for us to just speak the IO language, and now I'm like, oh wow, I have to do a lot more reading and catching up that I didn't realize in the moment. I was like taking in so much information, and but it's true, like hearing that and like speaking with people still in the program kind of gives me that memory back of like, oh, this is what's pertinent, this is what we need to know about. And I'm sure, Mike, exactly what you're referring to right there.
Yeah, just what to be aware of, right, in the workforce, because you're going to enter it, and you both have entered it, right? So it's you're now entrenched yourselves in positions. You're trying to learn, right, not only what you do on a day to day basis, but you're probably learning where can I take my career as well, right? So definitely coming like full circle in terms of all right, I have all this knowledge that I learned from my program, and I'm focusing on other stuff right now, and I'm not too sure that I remember all of it. However, who knows? Maybe the next step you'll have to refresh yourself. You get into something that you think you forgot. And then you might be able to dust off those types of skills and say, all right, okay, I remember this. I know how to apply this. And that's what kind of helps in terms of career development too, is being able to kind of reach back into your tool sets. I know we'll probably talk about a lot more like this as we kind of move along in the conversation. So I don't want to spoil anything that I'm going to say right now, but yeah, you're totally right, Brandon.
No, that's a perfect segue into our I guess our two-part episode of PhD and Mercer. But I guess we could start out with the PhD. So like as I said, you got your PhD from Hofstra. And one of the things we wanted to ask you was more about the process in general and your process of going for your PhD and how you dealt with maybe the more intricate, um, tough sides that not a lot of people talk about, like actually completing it. And how do you deal with one of the words that we're going to talk about this episode is imposter syndrome. But before we get into that, can you just tell us about actually completing your PhD? What were the thoughts running through your mind during that time?
Yeah, the lead up to it, right? Actually finishing the dissertation, signing those papers, getting it done, right? It was a heck of a journey from start to finish. I mean, let's start with the start. I mean, it really was something that I had in the back of my mind in terms of my IO training. Um, I had kind of started a little bit later in life, right? I had a career before I entered the IO sphere. I was in sales, I was in merchandising, I was in things like that. But with it always in the back of my mind that, you know what, IO psychology is my interest, and that's how I entered into Baruch College, their master's program. And from there, as I was studying, as I was learning about all the things that I really wanted to be kind of learning about in that period of my life was, is IO psychology right for me? So I took the master's degree as kind of an exploratory first step. Not everybody does that. I mean, for a lot of master's students, they know what they want from an IO degree. They know what kind of career they might, get into eventually. Mine was much more exploratory in nature. And by the time I had finished at Baruch, I knew that I wanted to go for my PhD. I knew that I knew at the time, let me say that I wanted to kind of continue to study leadership development. However, once I actually made the choice to start, applying to PhD programs and really kind of, harness what I really wanted to be studying, it went from leadership development to, I think I just want to know more about how to be a scientist from an organization perspective, right? So I didn't have a true calling in terms of, all right, I always wanted to be an executive coach, or, I always wanted to kind of get into assessments or something like that. I did not have that in the back of my mind. What I did was, let me keep continuing to learn about the science behind industrial organizational psychology. And from there, develop a passion in terms of where I was going to go with my career. So as I was finishing up Baruch, right, I made the choice that I'm going to continue on, find my niche that way. Keep looking at maybe the IO handbook. Keep kind of networking with the people that were potentially at Hofstra or some of the other schools that I applied to. I won't even get into that. I'll just keep it with the Hofstra, right? So I ended up getting into Hofstra, and I was really, really, really excited about it. It was at home here in New York City. I've been living in New York City pretty much my entire life, so I knew I wanted to keep it local. Um, but the chance to study at Hofstra was really something that kind of stuck out to me because I had known a few Hofstra people from networking, right? We talked about networking prior to this. We want, you want to kind of insert yourself into a position in a PhD program and to not only sharpen your tools as an IO psychologist, as a scientist practitioner, potentially, right? That's the applied portion of it, but you also want to kind of put yourself in the best place to succeed in your career too. And I remember that going to previous psyops, right? I had run into so many Hofstra people that had such a kind of close knit kind of family feel to it almost. And I knew that that was really kind of something that I would potentially enjoy getting out of Hofstra. But when, I kept on thinking about it too, they had a number of really great kind of subject matter experts where I knew that once I got into the program, or if I got into the program, I could start making those decisions, right? What do I really want to focus on as an area, for my dissertation, potentially for my career, things like that. So it really kind of came together as the perfect package of not only could I be confident about meeting the right people to kind of help kickstart my career, but also have a good choice of different subject matter areas where I can really dive into and start to create that passion even to the to the next level, right? It started off small with a small passion, right? I have a story just like everybody else that starts in IO psychology, right? Why? How did you find IO psychology? Well, I had a manager that wasn't so good in the past, and I thought there has to be a way, from a scientific perspective, that we can help managers become better, create a better work environment, really improve, right, the work environment for their employees. And that's how the interest started there, and it kind of snowballed, and probably why I started with leadership development. But that has changed, and I'll get into more of that as we get into the Mercer aspect of things. So it really was, I did enough work to figure out what was happening within Hofstra, from a content perspective, but also I enjoyed the fact that, everyone was pretty open to talking, and they were all very, very nice in terms of, hey, let me introduce you to somebody. Let me keep continuing to kind of push the bar up a little bit about this is where you can go. This is who you should be talking to. I really found that kind of enjoyable in starting my career.
It's great. And you wouldn't think it, but it makes sense that in order to do your PhD, you should probably do some research before you do your PhD. So
Correct.
um,
Yeah.
that process definitely resonates. And it's really cool that in that process, a big piece of that was networking. Because sometimes, like, I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the Hofstra network and how strong it is. But sometimes people forget to incorporate that in the time that they're looking for a PhD program. And that's probably how you made, like, you were able to get so much valuable information on what program to choose. Made the right choice, by the way, to go to Hofstra. But so it's definitely really awesome to hear that that was kind of like how you were figuring it out. And what you mentioned in the beginning was how you just finished your PhD a few years ago. And we kind of spoke a little bit about this at PsyOp. I wanted to bring it up here on the podcast too. Is just like the process of going through the PhD is definitely something that is stressful. Joe and I had an episode, our last episode that just came out with Mark Arian was all about imposter syndrome for CEOs. We're going to dial that down a little bit and talk about that more in the realm of the PhD area. So for you, Michael, when you were going through and you were doing your PhD, what was that experience like from like the mental perspective? And like, I guess the most important piece of this question is for students out there listening to this who are considering going for their PhD or in the middle of going through their PhD, like what kind of like feelings were you going through and what, I guess, coping mechanisms did you have to really get through that?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic
Sorry, it's
kind
a
of
loaded
segue.
question.
No, no, it's a really good segue into kind of exploring that piece of it, right? Because I wasn't, I didn't have a particular content area in the back of my mind. It made it a little tough to kind of find one. Number one, I did a lot of research to get to where I wanted to be in the subject that I wanted to cover. But it also was one of those explorations of myself, right? Of, do I really want to complete this? I know that there's students out there that get into a PhD program and they start to say to themselves, "Wow, this is a lot of work." Right? This is a lot of stress. There's a lot of sacrifice, right, that I have to make to kind of get from the start to the finish of it. So that was playing in the back of my mind too. I had a career previous to my my IO degree. And I can't remember if I mentioned that already, but I had made the choice in my mid 30s to basically leave my old career and start this new career. And when you do something like that, I think it's inevitable that you start to kind of have those feelings inside, like, did I make the right choice? Right. So a lot of what imposter syndrome kind of entails is you almost questioning yourself to a certain degree. Did I make the right choice? Right? Am I taking the right steps to make something work? And then as you kind of insert yourself into the context of it, right? I am an IO psychologist, or I am a budding IO psychologist. I have this incredible project to kind of undertake and see through to the finish line. That's where the questions in your mind start to get a little bit more specific and become a little bit potentially more negative in nature because you're just not sure. Um, it is one of those practices, and examples in life of, wow, you know what? You have all the tools to get here. You were accepted into the program. You had a great GPA, But at that point, when you're given the reins to such a large kind of, I want to say, like, you know, ambiguous task that a dissertation can represent, it starts to really bring up those questions in the back of your mind of whether or not that you can succeed. And from my perspective, I went through a lot of introspection, not only with myself, but also my advisor, right? Where we asked each other those types of questions, not only do you want to do this, but are you capable of doing it, right? So the one thing that I will say, just from like a strictly school perspective, is that, and I had to learn this the hard way, is that everybody wants you to succeed. That imposter syndrome also, like, almost kind of inserts into the back of your mind that you're not good enough to succeed, right? That you really shouldn't be here to a certain extent. What you need to kind of start to ask yourself is, do you really want to do this? That's the first seed that you plant in your mind, and then you start to kind of really kind of work on it and say, yes, I do want to do this. This is what what I'm here for. This is what I've chosen to do from an academic perspective. And then you work on that. It kind of blossoms a little bit in terms of, hey, now that I'm here, my advisor is becoming more of a peer. I'm understanding this topic as much as he or she is, right? I can actually go to them and ask them for feedback on things and not feel like I'm getting a personal attack or something like that, because that's how it almost felt in the beginning, right? When you write up something, you spend, a weekend, you write a few pages, then you come back and you see some red lines on it. It almost feels personal, but it really isn't. I think what I want to remind a lot of students that are out there and going through the process is that your advisors, right, faculty within the program, they want you to succeed in the end. That's really something that you need to kind of understand in the back of your mind, is that they're not there to knock you down, they're there to build you up. All right. And that's how, from an academic perspective, I needed to make that kind of evolution in my mind that this is not something I'm doing wrong. It's something that I'm developing, right? It's something from a positive perspective that I'm trying to get to. And they're there to help me along the way and take those particular steps to get to where I ultimately want to be, which is a done dissertation, the best type of dissertation, right? So, yeah, the imposter syndrome can kind of come out of nowhere to some people. It can be something that builds up for a long time. But I really think it starts in terms of that self doubt that, you're challenged for the first time in your life. And that might be something that kind of pops in there, and you probably should be aware of, right? You need to develop some sort of self awareness in that space, just to make sure that you can get through your program, not only successfully, but also, from a clinical perspective, healthy.
And you alluded to it at the beginning, but I guess it was a good idea because you won I don't know the exact name of the award. Is it the best dissertation, or is there
Yes.
probably a better name for it?
It's called the Robinson Award. It was for the best overall dissertation of the academic year. So you submit, or the faculty decides to submit your dissertation as kind of the best of the crop for that particular year, and then it moves up to the psychology department, and then it keeps going up the ladder if you keep kind of winning to your versus all the other programs within the university as well. And mine ended up winning in the
I didn't
academic
realize
year.
that. I thought it
Oh,
was just IO. I thought it was you against the 4 other PhD students. That's
That's
very
awesome.
impressive.
yeah. It, and here's the thing, right? So my advisor was telling me the entire time, this is a good dissertation. This is a good dissertation. And by the end, he kind of changed the frame to, this is a great dissertation. But I was just trying to finish. I didn't even know, like, the quality almost of the dissertation by the time that we ended up. I'm really being very honest here, right? That I was so consumed by the process and just making sure that I was kind of checking off all the things that I needed to do to defend the dissertation so well, that I was a little bit oblivious as to the overall quality of it. So when it started to kind of win and get through in the process, and keep going up the ladder until it was a final contestant, I was a bit shocked. I mean, obviously, in the end, I was super happy that I won the award, but that made me kind of understand from an imposter syndrome too that, right, I was one of these people just like my peers, right, that were working towards this dissertation, working towards a doctorate, and then I was just as good as them, potentially better. I mean, I don't want to kind of sound too, you know, too heady or anything like that, but it was good enough to win that award. And one of the things that I take from that, from a personal perspective, is that hey, it helped me kind of take the next step. That you know what, I'm not so much of an imposter. I am an IO psychologist. I do create this great work. I have something to add to the field because that's what your dissertation really does, right? It broadens the field just a little bit, right? Like a dissertation is typically not something that's going to redefine the field, but you're just adding to the literature that much more. But that's crucial for us as a science to kind of keep moving the needle that way, and that's what a dissertation is. And mine was so good that it got me to the point where I won an award, and hopefully I'll publish it one day. That's the next step. That's the next
That'd be awesome. I know. I definitely want to check it out. And one thing that also I think is really interesting, like we got into this discussion at PsyOp, and I'm bringing it forward because I think it's very valuable for people to hear. Is like the time that it took you for your PhD was not like the normal route.
one. Yeah. Yep.
Um, but there's a few questions I have about that that I think could enlighten a few people who are going through this process. One of which is like when going through that amount of time, like this is more of like a highlight, is the fact that if your dissertation won awards and was going up the ranks and comparing to other dissertations, even though it took you the amount of time it did, it obviously it paid out in the end. So when you're like looking at something like that, like what kind of learnings were there with like
Yeah.
taking your time and building your dissertation? And then the other part is like, how did you stay motivated throughout that time? And for our listeners, could you give them a reference of how long it took? Because I believe I remember the number, but I don't want to misquote it. So
Yeah. All right. So Hofstra's program, they want you to typically finish in 3.5 years, and I ended up finishing mine in 7.
that was what I
So
thought. That was what I thought, but I want to make sure. I want to make sure.
I hit the 2x button on that. But Brandon, it really was important for me to take breaks at certain parts, right? There was a bit of that kind of mental exhaustion that I was experiencing, right? There was some almost writer's block that kind of came into it as well. I successfully finished all the classes, the required classes, and there just were points where, I would try and then I would get exhausted. I was working full time at the beginning of the program, and then I switched to an internship class, and I was, trying to make the best of the internship class. And there were just points where I was like, I don't know if I can do all of this at once. So I had applied for, um, extra time. I think it was twice. You're It was the first time was kind of just a semester off, and the second time was a semester off kind of later in the process too, because I had kind of gotten exhausted again, and I was really trying to kind of just keep a real beat on myself. It was really like, what's happening to me in these particular points. And when I took both of those breaks, there was things happening from a mental perspective for each one of them that was a little different than the next one, right? So the first time really was just an overall feeling of kind of exhaustion. The second time was, I just need to kind of help myself get used to my new job, because at that point I had started working at Mercer and I was full time there. I'd gotten a promotion from an internship to an actual junior consultant role. So I was really like methodically kind of moving through all of this, but using what I had available from a mental health perspective as well. You're allowed to take some of these breaks, and I know that people in our program have taken them before. Um, and that's not something that should stigmatize you as you're moving through it either, right? People need a break sometimes. We talk about, employee well-being a lot as IO psychologists, especially these days, moving out of, periods of time like COVID. And that was right as I was kind of finishing up. But it's applicable today too. I mean, most of the workforce that I survey, there are healthy amounts of people that are experiencing lots and lots and lots of stress and kind of tension in their jobs, right? We keep norms on questions like that in terms of what we assess in Mercer. And it's actually gotten worse over the last couple of years, right? So you yourself as a worker, as a student, right, should be assessing your own levels of that stress and tension in terms of what you're trying to do. Yeah, I know there's people out there that kind of took that 3.5 years as like, I'm going to get it done as quickly as possible, get out. That's great. That's awesome. It's a fantastic accomplishment kind of in and of itself. But for those that can't do it at that speed, that might need a little bit more time, it's not such a bad thing. And you shouldn't kind of think of it as a stigma or something like that. Your ultimate goal is to complete your doctorate or your master's or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in life, but you shouldn't be risking your own health in terms of trying to do it. That's a big takeaway that I needed to learn as I was moving through this process too, is that you really want to get through something as crucial as this for your career, for your life, in a healthy way, so as not to start off with having problems that might be kind of introduced into the work that you're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's
Everybody runs the race at their own
at their own
speed,
pace. Yeah.
or at however the saying goes. But the there's no, I mean, not that I can think of, but like whether you complete it faster or slower than someone else,
Yeah.
I don't think there's really an award at the end of that. Like I think you said it perfectly. You got to finish what you started by yourself and not really kind of worry about the distractions or what other people are doing around you. And that's not even
Yeah.
just for writing a dissertation, but I feel like that's for like life in general.
Yeah.
Someone might get a job at 21 and you get a job at 23, or you get the job that you really, really want at 35 or 45. It's all according to your own timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right, Joe. It's really something that people probably should focus a little bit more on in their professional and academic development, right? Is that the breakneck speeds might not be the right for you, right? There might be a little bit slower. I mean, we do have these very, very kind of defined timelines in terms of achieving certain degrees and things like that. But if you're able to slow it down and help yourself out a little bit, you're probably kind of going to find that as a useful kind of mechanism to achieving the overall goal in the end. Now, what works best with that is having such a great faculty that's understanding of that too. So this is where I give the kudos to the Hofstra faculty, and you know, obviously getting my back in terms of taking the amount of time. I didn't take 7 years to write a dissertation. I really probably only spent about 2.5 years of that really writing the dissertation because I needed time to take breaks. So it wasn't something like, hey, Mike had 7 years to write this award winning dissertation up. Well, no, it really was, a time of, reflection in certain ways, kind of recharging my batteries in other ways, and then figuring out, at the outset, do I really want to do this? And the answer was yes, and the outcome was a pretty good one in the end.
Yeah, it's impressive, and kudos to you for sticking it through, because some people might stop, and that is definitely something that's also very impressive and you should be proud of, regardless of the award or not, getting through that process and still sticking to it no matter how long it took.
And
Um,
Brandon, there should be no stigmatization or downside to say,
right.
hey, I don't want to do this either, right? It is your choice as a student to say, all right, I took 2 years in a PhD program. It wasn't for me,
Hmm.
right? Or finishing my dissertation. It wasn't for me. Let me just go ABD, right? Because even at that level, right, you probably still have a lot of, you have a lot of skills that you built over time too. And it shouldn't be about, hey, you didn't finish, right? We're going to hire you on as a potential IO practitioner or something like that based upon the skills that you bring to the table and everything. Yes, PhD is fantastic, but I don't want that to get out there and say, I don't want that to be out in the ether that, not finishing your PhD is a bad thing. What I'm really saying here is that try to control your own road a little bit more, right? Try to have or express a little bit more self-awareness where you are, excuse me, as an individual going through a very, very tough process, right? Take
Yeah.
care of yourself. That's really what it's about.
Definitely. And like we bring up this topic on here a lot about like mental health while you're going through school or when during careers. And it's interesting, Joe, you kind of alluded to this, and I'm going to highlight on it too, is the idea of seeing what other people are doing sometimes can be at your own detriment. And like LinkedIn is a good example. Like it's great because it like puts you in contact with so many people and it makes so many things available to you at the click of a button. But it also kind of makes you think that there are certain things you have to do because you see other people doing them. And that is not the way that it works, because anyone can run the race at their own pace, like Joe was saying. So I think that that message is really important, and the race can look different for everybody as well. It's not the same race. So I just wanted to echo that sentiment that you guys both alluded to there. Is a really good message. When you were going through your process and you were working while doing the PhD, I think that that's something that I think we could explore here and discuss, because obviously while going through your PhD program, you need to be able to afford to live. And so working full time while also doing that, what was that like for you? And how did you balance the workload of like a full time workload with also like a full time PhD student?
Yeah, that's another good question, Brandon. And it only gives me a little bit of PTSD, I guess. You know, I mean, it really was. I had to be very, very organized, right? There, there is a point in your career, or everyone's career, I would imagine, as an IO psychologist, where you start to have those conversations about being very detail oriented, right?
Mhm.
And some people are better than others, right? When I was going through the working full time and finishing the dissertation basically full time, right? Two different jobs. My detail orientation was good, I would say, but it had to be better. So that was one thing that I had to kind of work on in between both of those different types of jobs was, all right, from 9 to 5, I'm going to be doing the Mercer work. I need to be knowing exactly what I'm doing for an entire day, because by the time that 5 o'clock rolls around, I need to have dinner, and then I need to switch gears to the dissertation. And then with my dissertation work, I need to know that I am doing A, B, and C, right? Just tonight, get myself to a particular point and then call it a night and get some rest, right? We're going to keep pulling this thread about, mental health here too, is that you should be getting some rest during all of this too. That's very, very important, right? Everybody knows that from a psychological perspective and a physical perspective. It's both interlinked in terms of how you treat your body and what's going to happen with your mind as well. Um, so I had to take that to the nth degree that I wasn't super comfortable with. So as I was getting deeper and deeper into the dissertation, I was getting better and better at that detail orientation as kind of forced to do it. However, as I was being forced to do it, I saw myself really kind of sharpening my skills in that particular way. And I think that helped me in terms of my overall career, right? I was able to move up the corporate ladder at Mercer, right, from a junior consultant to a senior consultant and now a principal. Not only my knowledge of biopsychology, how to survey, how to kind of interpret employee data, but also I know how to project manage very, very well, which I think incorporates more of that detail orientation than anything else. All right. So my dissertation and going through that was really one of the first kind of overall kind of um, understanding that project management, that detail orientation was super necessary, not only to kind of learn for my personal life, but also my professional life as well. Right. So by the time that I had, you know, really started to kind of go full force, get back into kind of producing a lot of content for my dissertation, I was really able to kind of go back and forth between the two kind of a little bit more seamlessly because I was keeping logs of what I had worked on. I had kind of set up kind of plans for myself in terms of what I was going to accomplish, not only from a work perspective, but also a dissertation perspective. And I have an incredible amount of information on my OneNote from back in the day of, where I had to go next, not only for work, but also for the academic side of things and what needed to be accomplished to keep myself on the right track, and really kind of push those deadlines that I need to meet, things like that. So it's a lot. It was a lot in that, at the beginning of that period. And the crazy part about it was that COVID was happening, and it almost helped me because I was stuck at home, right? That right at the beginning of 2020, when I really started to kind of get back into high production on my dissertation, I was at home. I wasn't going anywhere. There was no other kind of things that I needed to do with my personal life other than just stay home with my wife, or at that point was my girlfriend. We didn't get married until the beginning of 2021. Um, but that kind of helped a little bit. I mean, if you're going to take any positives from COVID, I guess that's one good thing. When you're writing a dissertation, staying home and not going out at all is probably helpful. But It really did just force me to make sure that I had everything laid out in front of me, at least a couple days in advance for what I wanted to accomplish to keep myself on track.
I think staying organized is like the best thing that you can possibly do, because you said it right, that like if all you have to do is, I mean, actually doing the work of course is tough, but like actually thinking about how you're going to organize it out. Like I remember, I think it was either Monday or Sunday, I was like, all right, let me organize the slides and show where I want to put the data in, so that when I actually go and analyze it, it's all set and I just have to kind of fill in the boxes. So seeing that from a PhD or a dissertation standpoint of maybe outlining subheaders or however you did it, and like organizing like your data points, it makes the process so much smoother, because you don't actually have to do all that extra thinking that you already did and maybe you planned it on like a Sunday.
I became a professional bullet pointer. Like that's what it was, right? Like it was, I need to do this, this, and that. And that's not like creating insights for a client or something like that. It's literally just tasks that I need to accomplish to make sure that by the end of the day, I felt like I moved the process along, to an effective extent.
Yeah,
Um,
taking the Hogan, that's a high prudence.
yeah, yes, yeah. I think I did score high on that in my Hogan, actually, to go through that training. That's funny. Um, it really was, the exercise of a PhD, or achieving a PhD is all about time management, project management, things like that. Because especially with Hofstra's program, where you go into school at night, most people are working during the day, or at least internship, having an internship or something during the day. And, there's still something else that's happening, in your life at that point to go along with the academic journey that you're on. So you have to build that muscle up. You have to make sure that you are staying on track. And the best way to really do that is to develop that skill, right? I have an old mentor from my first internship before I had an internship at Mercer. We're going to talk about that, later. But it was one of those things where she really impressed upon me, Evelyn Rogers. She was great at really kind of, you need to be more self-aware, and within that self-awareness, right, is, am I falling behind? Can I get myself ahead? And it contained that kind of aspects of, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to be writing things down a little bit more. I can't just take it kind of blasé and just kind of move along and, hey, here's what I think I need to do. No, it needs to be really kind of carefully tracked and thought about, strategically as you're moving through the process to help yourself get to the goal, in the end. And if you couch that along with all the mental health stuff that we're talking about, once you kind of go through the struggles of understanding that you need to have a little bit more of a blueprint for things, you start to feel better about the process overall from a mental perspective too, right? You're much more comfortable with, yeah, I can get this, and that done in one night versus, your probably your original thoughts might have been like, oh my goodness, I have so much to do. No, break it down. Make sure that you're kind of, carving off a little bit of what you need to do each night and get yourself to the point where you feel that comfort level of, hey, I accomplished something for the day.
Yeah, totally. It's I making those lists. I mean, the goal setting theory sets in there a little bit, and
Yep.
just getting things done. And I mean, you feel the accomplishment. I don't want to keep you too long here. I want to make sure we get to ask the question that we ask you, that we ask all of our guests, because we will have a part two to discuss your Mercer experience. Uh, so we ask all of our guests this, and I feel like honestly, this episode is full of all the right answers, but we're going to ask again anyways. So, what advice, Michael, do you have for prospective IO students or people who are starting off their IO careers or even their PhD journeys? What general advice do you have for people out there starting off their IO careers?
Before I answer that, I want to just push back on you a little bit, Brandon. It's not all the right answers. Hopefully, what I've provided is just some things to consider. That's what it is, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
not everybody's journey is the same. All right. I'm hoping I at least provided some things for people to think about as they're moving through that journey. And maybe they'll turn out to be the right things. All
Right,
right.
right.
That's how we'll kind of couch that one. But yeah, for prospective IO students, all right, one of the things that really became very kind of self-evident to me as I was moving through this, and you both actually hit on it a little bit before, and you summed it up nicely, is that you might not know exactly where you want to go with your career or the content area that you want to study. All right. But you know that you're in the program for a reason, or you know that you've picked IO psychology for a reason. And what you should be doing is just continue to be curious, not only about what you're learning in school, but also learning about what others have gone through, right? Continuing on with the networking aspect of it, right? I would say that a PhD program is not all about academics. It is your first real kind of opportunity to meet others that really, really love the subject matter, the subject matter as much as you do, right? That have developed a passion for that. So, for a prospective IO, career, I would say just continue with the curiosity. Don't leave it in the academic realm. Try to get out there and network. I know there's an incredible amount of people that are really, really super uncomfortable in terms of networking. All right. But you know what? There's a lot of people just like you out there, and I bet they would want to talk to you about being a little bit uncomfortable about networking. And you know what that does? That at least starts the spark with networking. Speaking with some other people that might have some similar experiences you as first can really kind of help open you up to having newer and different experiences and putting yourself out there to people that you might not have said hi to at a particular point. So mine is kind of an overall story of continuing the curiosity, not only that got you into IO psychology and why you want to kind of understand the psychology behind the workforce, but take it to the next degree too. Make sure that you're able to kind of talk with other people about it and be curious about what they're doing too, because you never know what you might get out of those experiences, and they'll probably help you in your career from a long run perspective.
I'll take your advice one step further, Mike.
I
If you
like
really don't like networking, just start a podcast, and then people will have to come on and talk to you.
and then the people come to you. I like that, Joe.
It's like a trap.
That's wonderful. See, that's thinking outside of the box, right? That's you being probably curious not only about IO psychology but podcast, and now you're here. That's great.
No, yeah, I like your point about um, it. To me, it almost sounds like being like a lifelong learner, which I and I think other students can relate to this too. We've all been in that class, whether you're in high school, college, or grad, or maybe even PhD, where you're like, I just got to get through this class. Do I really care if I learn something? Not really. Let me just get this grade and go on. But one of the things that I started learning throughout my academic career was staying, as you said, curious. And I mean, you're paying to be there, actually trying to get something out of the class. Like when you actually say it out loud, you're like, well, yeah, of course I should try to learn something. But you really have to internalize that thought. And it'll set you apart from so many different people that are just flowing in one ear and out the other. And it will lead you to, like you said, other people that are like-minded that want to learn more about the subject, and engrossing yourself in all these different subject matters, whether it's leadership development, or selection or any other IO topic. I think you'll find yourself in a different place than if you haven't done that before. So I love that part about staying curious and staying or keep learning.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those kind of core foundational aspects, I would say, of being an IO psychologist, right? It really is something that you need to continue throughout your entire career, and hopefully that kind of bleeds over into life as well, right? As if we start to think about that mental health aspect of it too and well-being, right? Curiosity keeps you motivated, right? It really does, and that could be for any aspect of your life.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I do want to piggyback off of what you guys both said there. And in terms of the networking piece, like there are so many people out there who don't enjoy networking, and that is very fair. I am not one of those people. Also, why Joe partnered with me to do this podcast. And I think that one thing that I've learned a lot about networking is taking the word away from, or taking the power away from the word of networking. And I remember, I mean, honestly, the perfect example, and we're going to bring this back to the beginning of the episode, is PSYOP. Like Joe and I got to spend a lot of good time with you, Mike, when we were at PSYOP, and it didn't feel like we were networking. It just felt like we were having conversations, we were hanging out, and and it feels like that because we took the pressure away from like having to do something, and we did it because we wanted to, or because we were just in an open opportunity where we were all just discussing like-minded things. It didn't have to be IO psychology. And so really like separating the idea of what networking is with the idea of just making connections and meeting people, I think has turned my network into something completely different. And I feel like I made genuine human connections, not just business connections. And like, I know Joe and I consider you and everybody else who we've met along the way, like those types of people.
Yeah. I'm going to be coming to you guys for networking connections at some point with the popularity of this podcast. So kudos to you. We'll throw those around as well. But no, agreed, Brando. I mean, it's really, if you can really start to kind of tweak it just a little bit in your mind, right? Networking sounds like a job, but having a conversation with somebody is kind of something that we do on a day-to-day basis almost. If you can just
Hmm.
tweak it just a little bit in your mind, you'll probably find a little bit more value in the process.
Perfect, perfect advice. Well, thank you, Mike, for chatting with us this evening.
Oh,
I mean, we said it before. We'll have a part two to talk about your actual current career and position, so we don't go an hour and a half of podcasting. Might be our longest episode yet. But yes, we thank you for joining us. We had a great time.
it was my pleasure, guys. It was great to talk with you. Can't wait for part two.
We're looking forward to it. That was a really great episode. I love when we have moments like that on this podcast show where we can kind of get raw with some of the things that I think get left unsaid when people go through their masters, go through their PhD, or they're applying to jobs, or whatever the case is. It's good for people to hear that perspective.
Yeah, Mike had a really great story about his dissertation and PhD. It's a bit unique to his situation. So it'll be interesting to hear people's thoughts on the comments of our posts, who can like relate to what he went through.
Yeah, definitely. And for students out there or people who are thinking about going for their PhD, or if you already finished your PhD and you still have the PTSD from it, whatever the case is, just remember that like there's someone out there who's probably gone through or going through the same thing you are. So don't be afraid to reach out. And you got Joe and I here too. So we're definitely happy to have these types of talks on this podcast. And hopefully we can open up and explore more of this type of area and conversation later on too.
Yeah. Well, thank you as usual for everyone for listening, and we will keep an eye out for part two with Mike. Hopefully, it'll come somewhat soon.
Yep. And see you guys next week or 2 weeks in 2 weeks. I'm not used to it still, Joe.